Welcome back to Truck Tech, everyone. This week we get an opportunity to actually use really nice equipment, not just the stuff I carry around with me. We're here in Columbus, Indiana. We have a great opportunity to spend a few minutes with Jen Rumsey, the CEO and chair of Cummins Incorporated. Jen, thanks so much for the time.
Yeah,
really
good
appreciate
to see you,
it.
Alan.
Good to see you too in person, as you said.
Yes,
We've
very
done this over Zoom and other ways. I'm so happy to get a chance to catch up with you. You're coming up on 2 years.
Yeah,
right?
hard to believe.
It really is, because I remember talking to Tom Weinbarger, and, he said wonderful things about you. You guys have a mutual admiration society, of course. But he is, we'll talk a little bit about some of his mentoring later. Talk about those first almost 2 years. I mean, this has been quite a ride.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. This is actually my 25th year with Cummins, and I think about the first 2 years as CEO, and I came into the role, really clear on a focus on purpose, people, and impact. And that really was the centering driver for my career. I wanted the work that I did and continue to do have real purpose. I'm passionate about Cummins business, the applications that we serve, and the opportunity to decarbonize our industry. And I recognize the importance of people in that, our customers as people, our employees, and the power of what our employees do. And at the end of the day, it's about delivering real impact, the financial impact, of course, to our investors, the product impact to our customers, and ultimately the role that we need to play in protecting the planet for the future, too.
Well, and it's, I don't think I'm overstating to say it's leadership because, there's so many of your customers that are truly reliant on you. If we talk about your traditional business, you make engines for pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
And, some of the companies obviously make their own, but they look to you. And especially as we get, if you think about the medium duty business, which you basically are doing now for Daimler globally, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they are truly reliant on you for that. We get into 2027. You recently showed the, it'll be a variant, of course, part of the helm thing that you can explain, but, you've got the next diesel for 2027. People are ready for that. They're reliant on it, really. You've done a lot in the traditional business, and maybe we talk about that for just a minute, and then I want to get to some other bigger picture questions.
Yeah. Well, first, it's important to remember as I came in as CEO, our broad strategy we call Destination Zero, which is about continuing to advance our traditional core products, engine-based solutions, which, as you said, play an important role today and are growing, frankly, in the importance that they play to some of our customers as they evaluate if they want to continue to invest in their own engines. And then also the investment in the Accelera by Cummins business, electrolyzers, battery electric solutions. And so we can talk about all that. On the engine solution, of course, we have announced we're investing $1 billion in our U.S. manufacturing plant in these next generation engine platforms. HELM stands for high efficiency, low emission, multi-fuel. And these are going to be really innovative products that will meet our customers' diesel needs today with higher efficiency, and then also let them start to move to these alternate fuels, including natural gas and hydrogen.
Well, and natural gas, which we've actually, both talked about and written about quite a bit at FreightWaves because of a product that, it's the one that leads out on the Helms strategy, right? And I understand you could do as many as 3,000 of those engines this year before, Jose Samperio said, hey, this could be a 10% player, which is something that's kind of stunning when you think about the traditional role of natural gas at 1% or 2% and that sort of thing. Do you really see that kind of impact coming as you move forward? And we can use renewable, we can get that, net negative carbon profile.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of interest in the natural gas engine. It's not going to be a broad replacement for diesel engines. Cummins is the natural gas leader in North America today with our traditional products that we have.
12 liter.
Yeah, 12 liter, 9 liter. We have about 70,000 that we've sold to date here. Now on this new platform globally, we've sold more than 40,000 already. So we've gotten a lot of experience on this new platform, which will launch here in the U.S. this year. Right. Customers placing orders right now with our launch partner, PACCAR. And, we have some of the small and big fleets like UPS, like Walmart that have field tested it. They really like the product.
Right.
It has diesel-like performance and the CO2 benefit, whether you're operating on a traditional natural gas, which still gives a CO2 benefit compared to diesel, or renewable natural gas. And we've been partnering with some of the fuel suppliers, Chevron, Love, to bring renewable natural gas stations in the market to meet our customers' needs and desires to have a actually net negative carbon solution.
I spent a little bit of time in Salisbury, North Carolina a few weeks ago with Hexagon Agility, which of course they're expanding in anticipation of this. They're going to bring tank production into North Carolina in addition to, I believe it's Lincoln, Nebraska. And so there's a lot of people that are anticipating this. I want to switch into the global aspect of this. I'm going to ask the questions in a little different order. This engine, the X15N, started in China.
Right.
Why did you launch it there?
Yeah, well, the China market is another one that has started to see increasing demand for natural gas. And in fact, really that market grew faster than we anticipated, in part because of the differential between diesel and natural gas prices. Cummins is investing globally in these engine platforms, and that we localize and customize for different markets, but it lets us build capability in these new platforms and then, bring them into different markets at different times. And so that was a, really strong product for us in what otherwise was a rather weak economic market in China last year.
Was there always a plan to sort of bring it here? Was it the roadmap always to get it into this market? I know you have to talk to customers first and ask whether they would even be interested. And apparently there were enough interested that, you're making the investment.
Yeah.
I want to talk about China, a couple other areas, because I think these are what I like to call CEO questions, if you will. One of those is, your joint venture strategy in China. It's been a bit of a yo-yo over there because of the pandemic. They were the first in, they were the first out, then they shut down, and all that. How has that affected the joint venture business in terms of predictability?
Yeah, well, so remember, Cummins has been in China for more than 50 years. Actually, as you said, we go to market heavily through joint ventures there in China. And, those businesses were impacted by the pandemic for sure. I will say we did an incredible job of continuing to operate even with the lockdowns to meet the demand that was there. But it was interesting how we saw that initial shutdown, then actually a very strong market rebound in China. And then the emissions changeover happened there.
Right.
Their NS6 emissions, and then the COVID lockdowns. And, we've seen that market start to come back slowly, but it's still, well off of the peak that we would have seen in 2019 and then in that rebound that we had in 2020.
They're having some struggles economically in China anyway. Yeah. Do you see sort of do you have a good line of sight on that business, on the joint venture?
Yeah, the China market is the hardest one for us to predict. And, in part, it's, the visibility to some of the market indicators. Is there going to be government intervention, which historically we've seen some of that. So far what I'd say is that we've called the market as gradually improving with replacement cycles, with natural gas driving some demand. And that's what we've seen. 2023 was a little bit improved over 2022. We think we'll see a little bit of further improvement, at least on highway this year. Construction market there is very challenging, given the real estate
issues. Yep, absolutely.
There, and we'll watch and see if they of course release some economic targets for the year. So we'll watch and see if there's any stimulus or further action. But right now, just kind of steady pace, I would say.
Let me switch to Russia for a minute. You and many other businesses suspended or exited Russia at the time of the Ukraine invasion. Now we find that Putin has managed, quite honestly, to keep things running. The sanctions hurt, but they didn't shut things down. Have you rethought Russia in any particular way? Would you return? Would you sell your assets that you have?
Well, as you said, we made the decision pretty quickly, March 2022, to suspend our operations in Russia. We exited the joint venture we had with Kamaz there. We're out of business in Russia today. Unfortunately, I don't see any signs of that conflict resolving, and so I don't anticipate that you would anytime in the future.
But you don't have stranded assets there then because of it was a joint venture?
No, we've wound down now what we had there.
Okay, very good. We talk a lot about at Cummins. It seems like we've had a number of branding exercises, good ones, really.
Thank you.
Last time we talked about accelera, I was on the other end of the screen and you were over here when you launched that. But there's accelera. There was obviously the spinoff and the renaming and the rebranding of Atmos. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, I think you've got yet another one now with Helms. This is something that is not just a marketing function. I mean, there's a reason that you're doing all this. Can you sort of take us through that a little bit?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of creative people behind how we think about the brand, right, and how we represent the brand. And, thank you. I think that we've done a nice job of continuing to develop and evolve the Cummins brand, right, a power solutions provider that's moving toward the future, and also some of the unique elements that exist within Cummins. And so Accelera by Cummins was very intentional. That was just about a year ago exactly, actually, that we launched that new brand, because we are still known, as a diesel engine manufacturer, heavily as a diesel engine manufacturer, and getting the recognition in the market, and also creating a rallying brand for the employees in that zero emissions focused business, we thought was important, even as we evolved the broader Cummins brand to be something beyond diesel.
This goes to a bigger issue for Cummins, I think, and that is something that Tom Linebarger, your predecessor and mentor, talked about. We talked about this a couple of years ago before he left, and that was this idea that there's going to come a day when this business crosses over, when it will be more about perhaps Accelera and less about Cummins.
Right.
Do you subscribe to that? I presume that it's going to happen.
Well, look, the Destination Zero strategy is about our whole business today, very much about our whole business, and the investments that we're doing today in our people, in our plants, in R&D are across the business. And we're investing in some of our existing plants, like Fridley, Minnesota, where we do power generation assembly. We're now assembling electrolyzers for U.S. applications.
Sure.
In our original engine plant here in Columbus, Indiana, we're making battery packs. And so we're leveraging some of the people and the footprint that we have. We are, as I said, still investing in those Helm engine platforms and $1 billion in manufacturing here in the U.S. and that. And then, of course, partnership with Daimler and PACCAR and EVE Energy to enter into
which actually went in a
battery
Accelera,
cells,
right?
which is a part of Accelera. And so you see that happening over time. Now we will evaluate what's the pace of transition, what are the technologies and products that we need to bring into the market, and over time, I do expect that we'll see that evolving. We'll see growth in our core business for a number of years, but we expect as that growth in Accelera really starts to take off and adoption towards these alternate technologies moves, that will impact the core business, and we'll continue to evolve the footprint and the people and what we do.
Well, today the core business really funds a lot of what's happening at Accelera, and eventually I think you've looked at, was it 2027, I think, for sort of a break even or at least gross margin type of thing.
Well, we generated $4 billion in cash in 2023, record operating performance for the company. And of course, that all came from our core business.
Right.
And we're on a path towards a 2027 target for break even and Accelera.
Right. I guess I'm also curious from a branding standpoint, calving off the filtration business. All of these are strategies I'm sure that were at work for many years before they actually, took effect. But it seems like, one of the benefits of the Atmos carve out, if you will, is that you did it in a very creative way.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we are always looking at our portfolio. Do we have the right businesses? Where do we want to invest organically? You've seen us in recent years do more acquisitions and then this divestiture because we're really trying to position, our portfolio and our business for the future. The filtration business has some great technology and capability, and their opportunity to grow really starts to diverge into different areas than where Cummins is focused on growing.
Right.
And so by doing this two-step spinoff, we were able to, establish a new business in a way that made the most financial sense for our investors as well.
As you look at Destination Zero, does the idea of a standalone Accelera make sense down the road?
Look, we've got a separate business because we do think that there needs to be a recognition and intentional focus on that product's at a different stage of maturity.
Sure.
You've heard us talk about strength of the incumbent and agility of a startup. There's also a lot of benefits of being a part of the broader Cummins. And so for now, our focus is really being intentional on those two things. Where do we leverage the broader Cummins, the capability we have to scale and grow products, the facilities and people that we have, the customer relationships and partnerships that we have? And where do we need to keep a separate focus and recognize that technology and market is maturing? And if we use just our traditional ways of advancing technology and products, we will probably not be successful in the market. That said, who is continuing to invest and thrive as this transition occurs? It tends to be more the incumbents, right? A lot of those startups have gone through the hype cycle.
Yep.
They may have gone bankrupt or they're struggling today. And so, in what is going to be a long and messy transition, I think having that portfolio of solutions together has a lot of advantages.
You brought it up, so I'm going to pick it up here because I've been fascinated by one particular company over time. They had a powertrain solution. They worked with you, and that was Hyliion. You helped them certify the 12-liter natural gas, which is going away now. They have gotten out of the powertrain business and are focused on another area that you are big in, which is both data centers and power generation gensets, basically.
Yeah.
And they have a technology they bought from GE, and they are, because they didn't spend all their money, they're still out there fighting. Is that the kind of company, you've been big in acquisitions, Meritor and Siemens and others. Is that the kind of thing that if they prove out, that becomes a good thought for you?
I mean, look, we're always looking at where does it make sense to partner, and do acquisitions help advance our strategy? Do they bring capability? Do they bring customer relationships that we wouldn't otherwise have? I think we've done a lot of the big acquisitions and the foundational things that are important for the company right now. We'll continue to look at if there's partnerships or other acquisitions that might make sense for us. But what I'll tell you is we get a lot of people saying, "Are you interested?" And we have a pretty rigorous process to screen, does it really make sense?
Well, you're not going to spend your R&D money to advance that. If they get there, I guess it's a question of, do they have something that makes sense? And I wasn't sure you would give me a yes or no answer on that anyway. I have to bring it up because it was a big number. And that was this fine. Now, you have a great reputation, honestly, Cummins does, in terms of being a good citizen. But you knew this was coming. I don't know if you knew the amount that was coming, but it really was a pretty big deal. I don't think that you've been pillored for it. I don't think you necessarily need to be because you have a good reputation, right?
Yeah.
And it is one of my sons likes to say, everybody gets one. Yeah. Is that your one? Is that just...
Yeah, it's a disappointing situation. And we first disclosed in 2019 that we were having conversations with EPA and CARB over our pickup engine products and certification. After, a very long time of working collaboratively with them, finding that there was no evidence of wrongdoing, but we needed certainty, right? Every year we're certifying our products with these agencies. We're working with them to try to define regulations for the future. We needed certainty. We needed to move forward and resolve that issue. And so, that's what we did. It's good to have us behind us. And, Cummins, as you said, we have a strong culture here. We have and continue to be committed to emissions compliance. And we've been taking steps, of course, as the complexity of some of those regulations has grown to make sure that we have a strong program. And in fact, emissions compliance now reports to me directly as CEO to make sure that we have the right focus on that.
Did your reputation that preceded all this help you during the negotiation process? The fact, because the simplest thing to do, and, when you see the Attorney General in the press release for something like this, it's a pretty big deal and everybody pays attention. But this is so different, or seems different, from Dieselgate, from what happened in Volkswagen. The numbers aren't that far off, in terms of, the penalties. Yours being civil, of course, I need to make that clear.
Right.
But did you find that you were able to, there was still respect in the room even as you sort of went through this?
Look, as I said, we tried to stay collaborative. We tried to be transparent and work through the questions and the issues. Unfortunately, this is our highest volume product, the pickup truck, over a long period of time. And so the number of engines involved in that was high. And like I said, I am disappointed, frankly, at the number, at some of the tone, just given how we did try to work through this and the situation. But, we're moving forward. We haven't slowed down on our strategy and those investments. So the great news for us is that now, me and our team is really focused on that future strategy and how do we build on the strong history that we have in delivering these new platforms and delivering next generation batteries and electrolyzers and a lot of great things that we I think can do for the U.S. economy, for the global economy, as well as for the environment.
Let me end on this one, and that is we talked briefly about the joint ventures in China, but you have, by way of a successful joint venture, you have the Eaton Cummins joint venture for,
Right.
For the transmissions. What is your strategy overall in terms of how do you make the joint ventures and the partnerships work? What is the secret sauce, if there is?
Yeah, well, if you look at Cummins' broad strategy, there's several things that have really been a core part of our strategy. Technology leadership, innovate, embrace some of the challenges, like the need to decarbonize to drive innovation and create a technology leadership position. Scale. No one is in the range of commercial and industrial applications around the world that we have. And that's what's allowing us to invest in a whole range of solutions and meet our customers' needs as they evolve over time. Partnerships, collaborations and partnerships. We've been doing it for many years. It's a strength of the company. And people now more than ever are looking for opportunities to partner and, some creative partnerships that allow us as we're facing, this evolution to drive that together and share some of the investment uncertainty that exists with that. And then, of course, it's our distribution footprint and our ability to service and support the customer. And so you're going to see us continuing to partner. You've seen those in a whole range of spaces and, whether it's formal joint ventures, like the one that we did with PACCAR and Daimler Truck and EV Energy. And, we're really excited to be bringing production to the U.S. for commercial vehicle batteries, creating 2,000 jobs, and Mississippi is a part of this. So, I think there's some great things that we can do through these partnerships that will really help position these companies and the commercial vehicle industry for the future.
Right. Jen, it's been great. Thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the candor.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Okay. Great to see you.
Good to see you too. We really have a lot of appreciation for Cummins for allowing us to come in and use their facilities today for this interview with Jen Rumsey. Hearing from the top of the company is one of those things where you don't just get the strategy, you actually get some of the rationale behind the strategy. And we hope you enjoyed getting to hear from Jen on this episode of Truck Tech. We'll see you next time.